Well, here's another adventure for old Theseus. I've been hearing a knock coming from the driver's side wheel, and I don't know if you can see that ball joint there, but we got a good 3/16 of vertical travel, so ain't good. And yes, these have been replaced under the manufacturer recall warranty. Whenever they did that, like it was before I got the car, it was at like 100,000 miles, so it's only got like another 160,000 miles on top of that. So anyway, they're time to go. This one, the boot ripped, and it got really dry, and it started squeaking, and so I pumped it full of grease with a grease needle, and then wrapped it with self-adhesive neoprene tape, and that bought me another about 10,000 miles, and here it is. It's gone. So knew it was coming, but anyway, I guess I'll buy a set and I'll do that one. I'll just throw the other one on the shelf. I don't know how much of a pain this is going to be. If it ends up being pretty easy, it's not going. I'll just have to do that, but I'm hoping I can. God, this is going to be a pain. Oh boy, but we got to do it or we're going to die. All right, I've procrastinated long enough, and today's the day. Let's get to it. Jack stand, check. Wheel, check. Brake caliper, check. Brake rotor, check. ABS sensor, check. CV shaft hub nut, check. Tie rod end ball joint, check. Upper ball joint nut, check. Lower ball joint nut, and now the whole damn knuckle. Hopefully, theoretically. Give me a second. There we go. It only took me it took me an hour, actually. Not too bad. Now I can finally get in the damn shade. And here's our culprit, this guy. So, I picked up one of them there ball joint press kits. And we're gonna putz around with this and see if it actually presses a ball joint. Because if it don't, I'm gonna cry. Well, that took a little bit of creativity and angle grinding, but it got out of here. Apparently they don't make these ball joint presses for Jeep KJs, but here's the old ball joint. And guess we put the new one in and pray. All right, well, that was a pain, but we got the new Moog in here, so we're gonna grease it up right after we throw it back in the car, and hopefully all of this is done. And I don't think I'm doing the other side today because I just don't have the time. All right, and she's more or less back together. We had one small problem, and that's that fucking contraption nicked a hole in the side of the fucking boot, so I had to get some of the self-adhesive silicone wrap and wrap that sucker again just to be safe, and then I pump grease in it, but I'm not really quite able to get it all the way full because of the hole in there. But it's good enough, and we just won't do the other side, and then we'll have a spill ball joint. So there's that. But anyway, everything else is torqued on until my back hurt, and yeah, I think we're good to go. We just need to put the brakes and the wheel back on, and I think that's it. And just like that, there she is back together. It only took me less than 3 hours, which ain't bad considering how much most shit on this fucking Jeep fights me. So anywho, let's pack up the garage and go take her for a rip, and hopefully she stops clicky-clacking, and I can take this thing back to work because it's the only car I've got that's got perfectly functional AC. Nothing like a nice, cold, shitty light beer to end the day. Alright, so I'm out driving around doing shit for work, and for whatever reason, my alignment is now fucked up. I don't quite understand how that got fucked up from just changing the lower ball joint, because that is a fixed position in space. I mean, look at this shit. That's just obnoxious. Alright, so this shit's weirding me out, and I really don't like touching my alignment because it drives my OCD insane, because as soon as I touch it, I can never get it perfect, and then I end up fucking it up, and then I have to take it to an alignment shop, and then $120 later, I have an alignment that actually is good. And that's a pain in the ass, and I don't want to do that. Check tire pressure, both at 30, right where they're supposed to be. I cannot understand how a lower ball joint could affect my toe, because that's what's at fault here. You know, camber, actually, well, yeah, that side's compressed more than that side, so don't let it touch your head. Yeah, you know, camber's fine. So, oriented towards the car, If I turn the steering wheel this direction, it'll just stay there and it'll hold and it'll go straight and the alignment's perfect. Steering wheel was perfectly aligned yesterday before I started touching things. If I turn the steering wheel like this, it goes that way. If I let go, it corrects back here. I don't fucking get it. If my toe was messed up that much, I should be able to tell. And I mean, they don't look towed out to me. You know, that one looks perfect. This one looks a little bit off, but if anything, it looks towed out. But again, lower ball joint. That's dead center, directly underneath the hub. That should not affect the position of it. Anything. You know, it might raise or lower the height between the steering knuckle and the lower control arm, but that should not affect toe. That should affect camber. So I don't understand. Something else must be fucky, and I'm just gonna ignore it. All right, so I'm in here looking at things, and my only other thought is maybe, just maybe, somehow my rack and pinion has shifted that direction somehow. I don't know. I mean, I was banging on that tie rod end to try and get it to line back up, but that guy has always just looked off center, and that guy looks fine. So I don't know, unless my whole rack and pinion has somehow shifted relative to the frame and has thus, you know, taken the wheels with it. But that should be loose. That shouldn't, you know, be one set direction. You know, I mean, I don't know. I'm fucking puzzled. Let's leave it at that. All right, so I've got the steering wheel set perfectly straight, and I got the big 4-foot ruler as my straight edge out, and this side over here is exactly perfectly straight, as true as one can eyeball, and this one is off by like an absolutely imperceptible level. Like, it's like you can't tell. Like, that's about right about there. That's the angle. Like, we're talking like a fucking quarter, fucking sixth of a degree or something. That's it. So I'm just gonna get in here and I'm just gonna crank on the steering wheel and see if there's play in it while I've got the thing, you know, on the ground with the fucking power steering off, and just see if there's like, if I can move the steering wheel without moving the wheels or something. Because the only other thing I can think of is if the new lower ball joint is taller, then it pushed the lower control arm down, which then causes the whole assembly to move up slightly, because the lower control arm is what controls the shock and all that, which could have pushed the whole thing up. And if the geometry between the upper and lower control arms is not identical, like if the upper is slightly shorter, and that could torque the whole wheel up, which could then cause the thing to pull in ever so slightly. That's the only thing I can think of, but I wouldn't think the pull would be this fucking severe. But anywho, I've got the 15/16. We're just gonna get in there and just loosen up that tie rod end lock nut, and then just, I'm gonna mark the top of it, and I'm going to just expand the whole, I'm gonna just show you. So we got toe in, which means we need to push the outer tie rod end out, which is just that. Hey, do you know I could pause videos? Which is just that nut right there. So I should hopefully be able to loosen that nut and then just extend this rod outward and push that outward. I'm just gonna go one turn and just see what that does when I drive it today. And if it's too much out that way, then we'll just walk it back in. But I'm going to mark the tie rod itself, the nut, and the tie rod end, and we'll just turn it until the lines back up, and we'll tighten it back down, and then we'll know where our baseline is, and I'll just make sure I'm always dialed in with the revolutions. But that's the only thing I'm gonna touch. Like, nothing else is loose. I mean, I torqued the piss out of everything, and it's all fine. So I don't know. It's a mystery. All right, so we just used a pair of vice grips. Well, after we used the old 15/16s to loosen the nut and a rubber mallet, and we just grab the inner tie rod in and turn that exactly one turn, push wheel outward with the vice grips. Probably could have done that by hand. It wasn't too tight. And we're just going to lock this nut down. And should probably actually line up in the, well, close to the same spot. We're just going to torque that down, and we'll see whether or not our alignment has improved. And if it has, great. But I probably went a little too far with a whole turn, but we shall see. All right. Well, line this up off of a letter. All right. Survey says, I think we're there. Other side, still the same. So I just went in and recentered the steering wheel. Hopefully that's it. All right. So I just want to try and elucidate what I think happened here. So I'm not going to be able to explain this perfectly with one hand, but I am part Italian, so I should be able to get at least slightly comprehensible through just hand movements. But so we've got the steering knuckle like this, and you know the hub, and you know the bearing, the hub, the rotor, and the wheel are all mounted to the steering knuckle. They're all in one plane, ideally, so long as your hub is mounted correctly to the back of the steering knuckle. So the steering knuckle will stand in as a proxy for the wheel. So we have the steering knuckle. We got the lower control arm down here and the upper control arm up here, and we got the strut going around the CV shaft, pushing on the lower control arm down here. We got gravity pushing up on the wheel, which is pushing up on the steering knuckle. So the strut is counterbalancing the force of gravity, pulling the car down onto it. So we got the steering knuckle fixed here in space. And what we did is we added a new lower ball joint, which is what connects the steering knuckle to the lower control arm, which is underneath it. What I think is that the new lower ball joint is taller by like, I have no idea how much, quarter inch maybe, less, 3/16, eighths of an inch, but it's taller. It's the only dimension it could have changed, because the ball joint is radially, you know, the shaft is directly centered in the hole. That doesn't change. So that point did not change. The only thing that could have changed is the distance between the steering knuckle and the lower control arm, because that ball joint could be taller or shorter just based on how the manufacturer put it all together. So for whatever reason, that dimension changed. All right, so your upper and your lower control arm, I believe in this Jeep, are more or less the exact same length, you know, away from the chassis. Their mounting points are the same. That way when you hit a bump, your wheel goes up, but it doesn't just go up, it moves in an arc closer to the car. You go up, and then as you're coming down, the wheel shoots back down with the spring, so it hits the road before your car does, and can accept the shock of the bump. So anyway, your wheel is doing this as you're driving down the road and hitting bumps and going up and down and getting dynamic, vertical load on it to counteract gravity. So if the upper and the lower control arm are perfectly aligned, it'll just do this. But if they're slightly misaligned, then there's points where your wheel may pitch out like that. Depending on where it is, your wheel may do this sort of, I guess, or this. I don't know the exact geometry, but your wheel may not always be perfectly straight if you've got, these out of whack slightly, and they're sitting in a slightly different space, because at some points, one of the control arms may be slightly longer or slightly shorter than the other one, which will cause your wheel to do this. So I think what happened is, because we made the gap between the steering knuckle and the lower control arm potentially larger or maybe smaller, but it changed. The steering knuckle has moved up, but the lower control arm has stayed exactly in the same place, but we moved everything above it up or down relative to the lower control arm. And if the lower control arm is this length, and let's say the upper control arm at rest was sitting like this, and we now moved it up slightly, you see where my knuckle is over there? It pushed out, probably, ever so slightly. And when it pushed out, the distance between the two tie rod ends is a fixed distance. It's hooked up on the front of the steering knuckle, like that, on either side. And so, since this up here went out, this point right here, so since all this went out this way, this point right here stayed in the same place. So it had to pitch inward like that in order to move in. So I'm assuming that the ball joint must have been a different height. That's the only thing I can comprehend as to why my alignment went out of whack. If the ball joint was a different height, our upper control arm could have went from this to this, come out ever so slightly, which then caused this, the steering knuckle to pull on the tie rod end, and because tie rod end is fixed, it pulled it like that. And so we pitched in because we went out up here, which then caused this to do that. But anyway, that's my thought. I'm gonna go drive it. Everything looks like it's now aligned, and I'm hoping it's now at least pretty straight, because again, OCD, and so I will I want it to just be good, because then I'll not mess with it. But if it's ever so slightly off, I'm gonna be fucking with this thing until I break something. But anyway, I digress. Let's go to work. All right, survey says, looks like it's good. Still feels like it's pulling a little bit to the left, but I think that's just, yeah, it is pulling to the left a little bit. We don't have much of a crown on this road, but we do have one, so the wheel is aligned correctly as far as it feels, but it feels like it's pulling a little left. Anyway, I'll drive and figure it out. All right, so far it feels like we might have gone a skosh too far, like less than a quarter turn. So I might need to just tweak that ever so slightly. It feels like it's not quite perfectly centered, but it's sure enough, you know, close enough for government work. Like, you know, we're driving straight, pulling a little bit to the right. We're on a downhill bridge, so there's no crown here. Well, not a lot of a crown, but it's good enough. That's 100% certain. So I'll think on it, and I'll see whether or not I want to tweak it a little bit more. All right, well, I think I can live with this alignment, so we're gonna call the video here. This was kind of a pointless video. Don't really know why the hell I filmed it. I don't know. Sometimes you just gotta do what you want to do. But anywho, I digress. If you like this kind of crap for some reason, consider liking the video, comment. What is your favorite flavor of color? You know, let me know down there. And if you want to see more hot garbage like this for some reason, you got to subscribe. So smash the big gray button over there. Until next time, Tom out.